Hello, and welcome to Canyon Professional Development. During this session, we will be focusing on effective classroom management through engagement. My name is Carolyn Flora, and I am the K-12 Special Director at Canyon Professional Development. As we navigate through this session, I want you to consider what tools you will take away today. We know that the quicker we implement new strategies, the more likely we are to use them over and over again. I'd like to start off with a quote by George Evans. Every student can learn, just not on the same day or in the same way. As you read this quote, you might think this has more to do with differentiation. And you're right, it does have to do with differentiation, but it also has to do with engagement and classroom management. When we don't meet the different needs of the students in our classroom, then they're less likely to be actively engaged in the learning process. In turn, that leads to disruptions and off-task behavior in the classroom. During today's session, we are going to reflect on a variety of engagement strategies. We are going to identify the components of effective instruction, and we are going to talk about the importance of utilizing both formative and summative assessments to drive instruction and ultimately to increase engagement. As we begin, and as you think about beginning the new school year or the next new school year, I want you to identify what you hope to accomplish. Now, if you're already in the middle of the school year, you still have goals. What are those goals? What are you hoping to accomplish throughout the remainder of the year? If you need to take a second to stop the video and reflect on this, please do so. I'd like to start with a first week to-do list. From the first day, even before the first day, the students walk into the classroom. You are building relationships. It's important to start off the first week with a warm welcome, with getting to know you activities. However, we want to continue with these getting to know you activities throughout the school year. That is so important when developing a positive classroom climate. In addition, during the first week, you're going to want to send home a first week packet. Now, I know a lot of schools and a lot of districts send home items via email now, and parents fill them out online. However, as a classroom teacher, I always found it helpful to send a few things home myself. One of the things that was a necessity was a cardstock sheet that I would send home. I printed it on cardstock. On it, I asked for simple things like names, contact information. I also asked them to answer a few questions regarding their student. What are their likes? What are their dislikes? What types of things motivate them? What has their past experience in school been like? I would collect these, I would clip them, and they would stay on my desk the entire year. Although I could log into my computer and find contact information, it was always much easier to just pick up the stack of cards and have it right there. Just something to consider. During the first week, you always want to spend time learning your students' names. This is imperative, not only to make them feel welcome, but also for classroom management purposes. It's a lot easier to redirect students and to assign roles if you're using their names. Last but not least, it's time to set routines and procedures. I cannot tell you enough how important it is to go slow and make sure students understand expectations in regard to routines and procedures that you want them to follow in the classroom. Although some might complain and act like they don't like them, we know that students flourish when they're given rules and routines and procedures to follow. In addition to these getting to know you type activities, you're also going to want to start with some formative assessments. These assessments are going to look different depending on the grade level or the subject area you teach. However, you are going to want to do formative assessments in any content area you will be teaching throughout the year. I want to take a minute to go over the difference between formative and summative assessments and why these are so important and how they relate to engagement and ultimately classroom management. When we're thinking about formative assessments, we can relate them to when a chef is cooking a soup in the kitchen at a restaurant. As the chef cooks the soup, from time to time, he or she will take the ladle and maybe give it a little taste. If something's not quite right, they might add a little more salt, a little more pepper. They might let it cook a little bit longer. It's not finished yet. It's a work in progress. There's still time to make modifications and intervene if it's not going right. That's much like a formative assessment. You give your students formative assessments throughout the course of a lesson or a unit. When you give them these formative assessments, it's like a pulse check. You're able to see how they're doing at that moment in time. You're able to use these formative assessments to drive further instruction. Maybe you find that some students need a reteach of a lesson. Maybe you find that some students actually need more intensive interventions. However, you have time, and so you begin to implement these interventions. In contrast, summative assessments are more like when the guest tastes the soup. Once the chef is done, all the formative assessing has been done, he sends the bowl of soup out to the guest. When the guest tastes the soup, that is like the summative assessment. It's the final product. It's not likely we're going to take the bowl of soup, pour it back into the pot, and begin adding more ingredients. Instead, this is our picture of the final product. When we give a summative assessment to students, this is our picture of how well the student has grasped the concepts and the standards being taught throughout the lesson or the unit. A little more information about formative assessments that you might want to consider. Formative assessments are tools to evaluate how well a student is learning the material or the standards throughout the course of a lesson or a unit of study. These formative assessments should be used on a regular basis. Sometimes we don't even need to even call them an assessment because the more relaxed students are, the better idea we are going to get of how well they are understanding the information. In addition, they do not have to always be paper and pencil. That is a very old school idea that all tests or assessments are done pencil and paper. In fact, some of the most effective formative assessments are done using digital tools, are done using whiteboards, or even just a thumbs up or a thumbs down. They are more flexible than summative assessments. Oftentimes, we'll plan formative assessments within our lesson plan. However, there are other times where we might finish a lesson and say, I want to really get a pulse check and see how my students are doing. It could be something as simple as asking questions and having students give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. By having students engage in these activities, all students are showing what they know. When we follow the routine of asking questions and having one or two students raise their hands to answer, we are only gauging what maybe 10 to 20% of our students are understanding. When we use methods like thumbs up or thumbs down, we get almost 100% participation. Another one of my favorite ideas is whiteboards. In math, when we're doing problems, I might have students solve them on whiteboards and hold up their whiteboards at the same time. This way, once again, I'm able to evaluate how everybody is doing and how if everybody is understanding what is being taught, rather than just asking one or two students to answer the questions. This is a great way to formatively assess. It does not have to be pencil and paper that you grade and every student gets it back. Consider different ways that you are currently using formative assessments in your classroom. In addition, one of the most important things about formative assessments is because they are so flexible, they often are more engaging to students. If you're using digital tools like Kahoot or Quizlet, students view these as games, not as tests. And we know when students are engaged and they're feeling comfortable and relaxed, you're going to see better results and get a more accurate picture of how they're doing. Here we have a summary of what summative assessment is. Once again, summative assessments evaluate how much a student has learned at the conclusion. That's the difference. We are now at the end of the lesson or the end of the unit, and we want to assess overall understanding. Now, I want to preface this with the fact that to me, almost all assessments are formative because even if it's the end of the unit assessment, I am still going to go back during maybe intervention time and reteach some of the standards that maybe a handful of my students did not understand or get. I wanted to share two quotes with you regarding effective instruction. When we consider effective instruction, it's not only because we want to plan the very best lessons and provide information to students in the very best way. Yes, that is one reason. However, effective instruction directly relates to engagement as well as classroom management. If we are providing students with lessons that aren't effective, that aren't meeting their needs, they are much less likely to be engaged. When students aren't engaged, they're often more likely to be off task or involved in activities that aren't very productive. Let's take a look at these quotes. The first one is once again by Harry Wong. Harry Wong says, in an effective classroom, students should not only know what they are doing, they should also know why and how. It is really important to remember we need to share these things with our students. Think about yourself as an adult. If someone's going to ask you to do something or have an expectation, are you more likely to do what they've asked and to become more engaged if you know why you are doing it? Are you frustrated if they won't share that with you? In addition, the how is very important. Give students at least a high level overview of what their week is going to look like. Perhaps you're going to spend the week in ELA doing a literature study. Share that with the students. Let them know what to expect. This next quote is by Gail Goodwin. Teaching is 1/4 preparation and 3/4 theater. I love this. I think that we all know how important preparation is, but I don't know if we reflect on how important the theater part is. Now, no, you don't have to be an actor or an actress to be a teacher. However, what I mean by this is effective instruction and engagement connects directly to a teacher's enthusiasm for the content being shared. You need to share your enthusiasm with your students as you work through lessons. You need to foster excitement by sharing with them what they're going to get out of a particular lesson. So remember, good teaching is 1/4 preparation and 3/4 theater. Let's look at some specifics in regard to designing and delivering effective instruction. The first thing we're going to look at is direct instruction. This is the type of instruction that most of us are familiar with. Many of us might have actually been involved in a part of classes where direct instruction was the majority of the instruction that was taking place. With our traditional direct instruction, it was usually for an extended period of time where the teacher is delivering information in a lecture style format. We know that this has its place. However, we also know, after doing research, that asking students to sit for an extended period of time and just take in information that is being delivered by the teacher does not always deliver the best results. So let's look at some other options. Perhaps we could use mini lessons. Mini lessons are my absolute favorite. They are short lessons with a narrow focus that provides instruction in a concept or skill that is situated within a larger unit of study. What do I mean by that? If I am teaching how to write a persuasive paper, I'm not going to teach all the components on one day. Instead, I might use mini lessons to break it up. I might do an introduction to persuasive writing where I do some building background to find out what my students already know. Then the next day, I might start with a mini lesson about hooks. My mini lesson is going to only focus on hooks, how to begin a paper with a hook. You might be tempted to stray and throw in little tips about utilizing adjectives or complete sentences. To the best of your ability, you want to stay with that narrow focus. When you keep that narrow focus and you utilize these mini lessons, students are much more likely to really become proficient with the skill being taught. Another thing to consider are student-centered small groups. This type of instruction is very effective. Small group instruction allows the teacher to meet specific needs of students and to provide more scaffolding. I could go back to my example of teaching persuasive writing. After doing a whole group mini lesson, I might call small groups over who need more scaffolding. Maybe we've discussed how to write a hook, but I know I have some students who might need more practice. I might call them over and I might scaffold by giving them sentence starters, the start of, um, of attention grabbers, where they're able to complete it just to give them more practice. This might also be the case when I'm teaching a lesson on setting. We've read a piece of text, we've looked for the setting, we've identified the components of setting, but I know that I have students who are not reading at grade level, and the text I provided for the whole group mini lesson was at grade level. Maybe I scaffold by pulling them over and providing them with a piece of text that is at their instructional reading level, and then allowing them to use the skill they learned to identify the setting. A lot to think about. Once again, when we use these mini lessons, we are increasing engagement because we are not asking students to sit for a long period of time, which is going to help with our classroom management and our off-task behaviors. In addition, we are letting them focus on a specific skill or concept so they're really able to master and become proficient with that skill or strategy. Remember, our mini lessons should only be between 5 and 15 minutes long, depending on the developmental capacity of the students you're working with in the grade level. Even better, we should stick to between about 5 to 8 minutes whenever possible. Mini lessons can be used during whole group instruction or small group instruction. And some example content. I already shared a few examples, but remember, the main thing to focus on is that they only target one objective. So a specific skill set. Maybe they elaborate on a concept. Maybe you're using them to build that background and generate interest in a topic, or to clarify a question from a lesson the previous day. Remember, you want to teach specific strategies in isolation. I want you to take a second and think. Is there a lesson you've currently done in your classroom that you could perhaps break up into multiple mini lessons? By doing this, would your students be more engaged, and would they end up with an overall better understanding of the concepts being shared? Here's a quote, once again by Lucy Calkins. It says, "Our most effective mini lessons tend to follow a similar structure. That is, while the content of the mini lesson changes from day to day, the architecture of the mini lesson remains the same." Why do I share this? I share this because I want you to understand that although you might be creating multiple mini lessons for one day, it is not going to be a lot of work because the structure is always going to be the same. You're always going to introduce, you're always going to have one objective. Therefore, the only thing that's going to be different from mini lesson to mini lesson is going to be the content. If you would like to see a great example of a mini lesson in action, there is a wonderful resource on YouTube. There are multiple videos by Gwen Bloomberg. From what I've gathered, she is a literacy teacher at a school, an elementary school. During COVID, she uploaded multiple mini lessons for English language arts. The one that I recommend you starting with is her mini lesson number 6, using sensory details to create imagery and say more. You can get there by following this QR code on your phone or going to the YouTube link provided. I think you'll really enjoy it. In addition, in the handout section of this topic, I've included a mini lesson template. This is not something you're going to be doing for every single mini lesson you provide in the classroom. However, as we become more familiar with mini lessons, it's sometimes helpful to actually write out the full lesson plan until you're feeling comfortable with the process. Another quote: if students are not paying attention to our teaching, then what we teach doesn't matter. I want you to take a second and think about how this pertains to effective lessons, overall student engagement, and classroom management. If students are not paying attention to our teaching, then what we teach doesn't matter. We know that if they're not paying attention, they are most likely not engaged, or they are engaged in activities of their own. It is our job to find ways to keep them engaged, and providing them with relative effective lessons is the way to do that. In one of the previous slides, we talked about student-centered small group instruction. I want to touch on a couple other methods for providing instruction. Once again, a recap: small group instruction. It can be teacher-led. During these teacher-led activities, there can be differentiation. There can be extensions of the mini lessons. Perhaps, as I mentioned, they're coming over to you after the mini lesson and you're practicing the skill that was introduced. Another way to provide student-centered instruction is through collaborative work. This is when you're asking students to work with their peers. During this collaborative work, your role as the teacher is to be the coach. You're going to walk around, you're going to answer questions, you're going to guide inquiry. During these times, during this collaborative work, you're going to provide extension activities. You're going to allow for peer support. Maybe this is when they're going to be doing some peer editing. This is also a time that, as the teacher, as the coach, you can go around and listen to conversations. If we're solely providing direct instruction, our students aren't having a lot of time to learn to speak proficiently and learning to be good listeners. So this is an opportunity for you to go around and see how they're doing in that area. Last but not least, we have independent work. Once again, the teacher's role here is to be the coach. We can also have extension activities. Students can maybe be working on digital activities. There are lots of great educational programs out there that allow students to get some skill practice in areas where they might have deficits or they might need some enrichment. The important thing to remember here is that this independent work should not be filler activities. One of the things that make me cringe as I walk into classrooms is when I see students who are having students work independently just as a filler. And I see that all students are working on the same activities, the same worksheets. There's very little value in that. We want to make sure that the independent work is supporting their specific needs. In addition to mini lessons, one of my favorite ways to increase engagement and to get a handle on classroom management is through the gradual release of responsibility model. Many of you are probably familiar with this. If you went through any type of teaching program, this is generally one of the methods or strategies that is shared with you. So the gradual release of responsibility includes the I do, we do, you do teaching model. During the I do portion of a lesson, this is where the teacher models the correct way of performing a skill in a concept being taught. This might be a very short mini lesson where the teacher is going over and providing an example of the skill or the strategy. During this time, the focus is really on what the teacher is doing. Students might chime in a tiny bit, but really the focus is just on providing information. Then we have the second step, the we do portion of the lesson. This is when the teacher and the students work through an example together. Here in math might be where the teacher has already done the I do. They've gone over how to perform a specific skill. Now, during the we do, they offer another problem where the teacher is perhaps the scribe, but the students are telling them what to do. So during the I do, they've already had an opportunity to digest the information. Now, students are volunteering and helping the students work through another example together. The last part of the gradual release of responsibility is the you do. This is now when students are asked to demonstrate their initial understanding. They've maybe only had a couple of examples, the one the teacher did and the one they did together. So this is an initial understanding. They go through this independent practice, and then they might come back together to reflect with the teacher as a whole class. One thing I want to caution is that at times teachers will skip over the middle section, the we do part. What happens is they do the I do, where they're sharing how to solve the problem, the steps, etc. Students seem engaged. The teacher says, "Are there any questions? Does everybody understand?" They get the head nod and the smile. And many teachers, especially new teachers, can be tricked by the head nod. I caution against the head nod. Teachers often nod their heads just like we do when we're in trainings, even though they might not really be understanding the process. So teachers will say, "Wow, I did such a great job. I'm going to skip the we do and let them get to work. Why not?" As soon as they send them off to work independently on a problem, all of a sudden half the hands in the classroom fly up. They need help. This could have been remedied by just taking the extra 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes to go over the we do portion of the assignment. Instead, the teacher now has to wrangle back in everybody, some students who do understand and who are frustrated because they're now stopped, other students who have gone off on a tangent and are perhaps engaged in activities they shouldn't be because they didn't know what to do. Teacher has to bring them back and try to get them engaged in the we do portion. It is much easier and much more effective to make sure that you just follow each section of this gradual release of responsibility. I do, we do, you do. Once again, don't let them trick you with the head nod. I have also included a lesson plan document for the I do, we do, you do lesson plan. As mentioned with the mini lesson plan, this is not something that's an expectation for every lesson that you do. However, while you are learning and while you are trying to make sure you are including all the important components, I suggest that you use this and give it a try. It looks something like this, where you go through and you're identifying your standard and your objective, some key vocabulary, the materials, anticipatory set, and then the part that's really the most important is down here. During the I do, here you're describing what will the teacher be doing? Well, the teacher will be reviewing the steps in reducing fractions. During this portion of the instruction, the students will be listening. Very simple. We'd go on and do the same thing here for the guided practice part, the we do. During this time, the teacher will be the scribe. They will be calling on students to provide the next step in the process. Students will be raising their hands or responding when the teacher calls a stick to the next step in the process, and so on and so forth. I have provided a lot of information for you. I'd like you to take a moment right now to choose one idea or strategy I have shared that you're going to take away and implement in your classroom right away. Remember, we talked about a variety of engagement strategies. We also discussed some effective components of instruction and ways to implement them in your classroom. And last but not least, we discussed formative and summative assessments and how they can be used to drive instruction and increase engagement. As one last takeaway, I want you to see the connection between effective lesson planning, student engagement, and classroom management. They all go hand in hand. I hope you enjoyed this session and have a great day.